My name is Grace, and I never imagined my 26th birthday would end in humiliation instead of celebration. The living room was dimly lit, sagging balloons hanging in the corner, and a store-bought cake sat on the table with the price tag still stuck to the plastic. I told myself at least they had shown up. Then my father reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and smiled the way he always did when he wanted to grade me. For one reckless second, I let myself hope. I tore it open, empty. He leaned back and said, "A woman who can't pay her own bills doesn't deserve gifts." Laughter erupted around me, sharp and merciless. I stood frozen, clutching the blank paper, forcing a smile that burned like ash. And then in front of them all, I stood up and walked out. You won't believe what led to that moment. The door clicked behind me, a small, embarrassed sound, like a period dropped in the wrong place. Night air slipped under my collar, and the taste of blown-out candles clung to my tongue wax and cheap sugar, the flavor of pretending. Their laughter faded to a muffled radio inside, but in my head it kept playing at full volume. I gripped the empty envelope until the edges bit my palm and thought not for the first time that I had been getting ready for this moment my whole life without knowing it. I grew up in a house where everything grades, chores, smiles could be scored on a 10-point scale. My father delivered praise like a boss, handing out bonuses sparingly and usually to the favorites. Ryan was leadership material. Emily shone. I was almost there, as if I were a project he might cancel if I ran over schedule. On Sunday mornings, I'd slip out of bed early to make his pancakes just the way he liked them, batter-whisked, smooth skillet preheated until a drop of water danced. I'd wait at the table for him to sit and say something warm. He'd glance at the plate, glance at the clock, and launch into a conversation with Ryan about gym routines and grit a sermon pitched to the son who hadn't cracked an egg. I'd drizzle syrup and listen to the pancake sigh under my fork, soft the way something in my chest turned soft and shapeless, too. There were parties with rented speakers and photo slideshows, just never for me. Emily's birthdays had themed backdrops. The dining room would glow like a small wedding. When my birthday came around, budget became a moral virtue. "It's not about the spectacle," my mother would murmur, pushing a supermarket cake across the table, a single candle stabbed into a juice glass because the holder was somewhere. I learned early how to swallow celebration before it reached my throat. Before prom, Emily got a salon day and a photographer in the front yard. I hemmed a second-hand dress under my desk lamp, pinning and stitching until the thread puckered along the seam. The needle slipped once and a bright dot bloomed on the fabric. I pressed my finger to my tongue and tasted metal, then kept sewing. When I came downstairs and asked how I looked, my mother said, "Simple as nice." My father didn't look up from his laptop. "Curfew's 11, he said. In the hallway, our family portrait hung slightly crooked. A hairline crack ran through the glass and split my face at the jaw, an accident that no one got around to fixing. At night, when the house whispered through its vents and the fridge hummed like an appliance trying not to be noticed, I lay awake, tracing the freckles on the ceiling paint. I'd catalog the small repairs I'd made that week, switching out the hallway bulb, tightening the rattle in the bathroom fan, repairs no one saw unless they squeaked again. I'd ask myself a question with no answer. What sin earns you invisibility? Sometimes I'd creep to the kitchen for water and catch my reflection in the dark window, a girl ghosted out by her own home. There were glints of kindness that didn't come from them. My grandmother, sitting with me on the back steps one leaf-red afternoon, pressed her warm, paper-thin hand over mine. "Don't let people price you by what they refuse to give," she said, eyes on the maple as it shed itself. "What they withhold is a mirror of them, not a measure of you." After she passed, her wind chime kept talking when the weather turned. On quiet nights, its thin music threaded through the kitchen like a reminder that somebody once saw me whole. Ryan learned to speak in bullet points and always had an audience. He could spill cooking oil and leave the paper towels for me, then give a speech about accountability to anyone who'd listen. Dad bought him a watch for a promotion and toasted to seizing opportunity. I stood at the sink, rinsing Flute's sleeves damp to the elbow bubbles, slick and rainbow. Emily turned every errand into content lattes with Heart's white sneakers on a brick step, the kind of brightness that begs for "so proud of you" in the comments. Dad wrote those comments for her. He sent me private messages with advice. Maybe focus on something practical. Still small wins found me like coins on sidewalks. A cafe regular wrote a thank you note for a menu caption I'd tweaked. A church bulletin I designed drew more volunteers than expected. I kept proof in a shoebox under my bed, a movie stub, a scribbled compliment from a manager, the lace I'd cut from the dress to make the hem right. The lid creaked when I opened it, and the smell cardboard and a little dust like the air inside a book steadied me. If the box could exist, then so could I. But the house kept presenting me with a role I hadn't auditioned for, the harmless punchline, the assistant, no one pays the daughter who should be grateful for being tolerated. Realism, my father would say when I asked to be included, as if he were handing me the weather report. There will be clouds. Plan accordingly. Realism meant my plans were cute, my ideas someday. Realism meant Ryan's mistakes were learning curves, and mine were character flaws. I learned to accept crumbs, then to bargain for them, then to pretend I didn't want a real slice. Acceptance looked like laughing at jokes that left me stung for hours. Bargaining looked like offering to take Emily's photo really quick if she'd please help me carry in the groceries. Pretend looked like smiling when my father used the word burden near the same breath as my name, not in a bad way, he'd say, as if tone could change the truth. When good news showed up for me, it had to squeeze itself into the cracks around their stories. I started taking on tiny freelance gigs, caption cleanups, a logo for a neighbor's bake sale, a flyer somebody needed by morning. I told no one because congratulations tend to die in certain rooms. I clutched those gigs like matches and struck them in secret, telling myself that a cluster of small flames could at least warm my hands. On the night of the birthday, when the empty envelope lay flat against my palm, I felt two things at once. First, the old sting. Of course this is what I get. And underneath it, something lighter. An empty envelope is also a blank page. Paper cuts, yes, but space to write. The thought was so quick I nearly missed it. I stepped back inside to clean because that's what I do when I don't know where to put my feelings. The hallway bulb flickered and steadied. I paused at the tilted family portrait and straightened it on its nail. The crack still ran through my smile. You can adjust the frame all you want. The break is still the break. But straightening it kept my hands busy, and sometimes busy feels like a plan. I slept the way you sleep after a long drive with the windows cracked, half aware of the world wind moving through. In dreams, I kept opening envelopes and finding strips of blank film, as if my life had been photographed but never developed. When I woke, gray light ribbed the blinds. The house was quiet in that self-satisfied way it gets after a storm. It believes it's weathered. On my bedroom door, a note waited like a red stamp. My father's handwriting, a tight, no-nonsense scrawl, circled a single number again and again until the paper bruised. It wasn't a message so much as a price tag, the kind they forget to peel off at parties and pretend not to see. I touched the circle with my thumb and felt ink drag across the pad of my skin. Somewhere deep, the shoebox latched itself shut. Somewhere deeper, the wind chime in my memory gave a small iron smile. I didn't know it then, but the number on that note would become the hinge the door swung on. A sum that could turn a house into a ledger and a daughter into a debt line. I read it twice, 3 times, hearing my father's voice, as if he were in the hall already rehearsing the speech he loved to give about teaching responsibility. And yet, beneath the familiar humiliation, something steadier took root. A sentence formed not out loud, but in muscle and bone. I will not disappear. The number on the note haunted me all day, even after I peeled it off my door and shoved it into the wastebasket. 900. It wasn't just digits scrawled in red ink. It was a line in the sand. I tried to focus on my shift at the cafe, but every time I rang up a latte or wiped down a table, the number resurfaced like graffiti sprayed across my eyelids. 900. Half my paycheck, half my air supply. That evening, my father gathered everyone in the living room. He did it the way kings summon their subjects, a clap of the hands, a voice pitched to carry. Emily rolled her eyes but obeyed, thumbs still darting across her phone screen. Ryan swaggered in from the garage, smelling like tire rubber and cologne. My mother appeared with damp hands, drying them on a dish towel as though the right chore could excuse her from what was about to unfold. I sat at the edge of the couch cushion, my pulse thudding behind my ears. Dad cleared his throat. "Grace," he began, and the way he said my name already felt like a verdict. "You're 26 years old. You live under this roof. You eat the food, use the water, the electricity, yet you contribute nothing. His pause was deliberate, a hammer held aloft. Then he swung. That ends now. Starting next month, you will pay rent, $900. On time, every month. If you can't, maybe this isn't the place for you. The room seemed to tilt. 900! I managed my voice a cracked whisper. Dad, that's more than half my paycheck. I'm juggling classes and shifts already. He cut me off with a snap of his fingers. Excuses. Life doesn't wait until you're ready. His eyes flicked to Ryan and Emily, witnesses to his lesson. This is accountability. Ryan smirked, leaning forward like a spectator at a game. Honestly, about time. If it were up to me, she'd have been paying years ago. His voice dripped with satisfaction, the grin of someone who had never once been asked to sacrifice. Emily giggled, her nails clicking against her phone screen. When she moves out, I'm finally taking her room. It's way bigger than mine. She said it like a joke, but her eyes sparkled with hunger. My chest tightened, heat rushing up my neck. 900 wasn't responsibility. It was exile, a clean way of saying you don't belong here. I glanced at my mother, desperate for an ally. She swallowed hard, then said softly, Grace, maybe this will be good for you. Pressure makes diamonds. You'll thank us one day. The words landed like salt on raw skin. Thank them for turning my survival into punishment. My throat burned, but I swallowed it all, the scream lodged in my chest, the tears threatening to spill. If I broke down now, they'd call it proof. Immature. Irresponsible. Ungrateful. I curled my nails into my palm until crescents marked the skin. Then I forced my lips into a nod. Fine, I whispered. Dad leaned back satisfied, as if he'd just delivered a sermon that would be quoted for years. Ryan smirked wider. Emily clapped her hands together like she'd won a prize. Mom's face softened into pity, which was somehow worse than cruelty. And me. I sat still, a storm sealed tight inside, every word I wanted to shout coiled in my throat. They thought they were tightening a leash around my neck. They didn't realize I'd already started weaving something else, thin threads of escape, fragile but real. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. $900 might as well have been 9,000. After handing over the rent envelope each month, I had scraps left for food, tuition, gas. I stretched groceries until they barely resembled meals, rice watered down into soup pasta served plain with a shake of salt. I skipped lunches telling coworkers I wasn't hungry. My bank balance dwindled toward zero like a cruel joke. Meanwhile, Emily strutted through the house in new outfits bags from glossy stores dangling off her arms. She posted photos online with captions about living her best life, tagging Dad with little heart emojis. Ryan's car rumbled into the driveway with brand new tires, his grin shining as if hard work, not Dad's wallet, paid for them. At the dinner table, Dad slipped notes under my plate, $900 due. His lectures were public, always loud enough for Emily to record, always sharp enough to draw blood. Grace, he'd say across the table, voice like a courtroom gavel. Don't forget your rent this week. Ryan would chuckle. Emily would hum the number 900 like a twisted nursery rhyme. And my mother. She would bow her head and sip her wine as if silence could erase the scene. I tried to keep my head down to endure, but the humiliation only deepened. One evening, halfway through dinner, Dad asked, So do you have the first month's rent ready? My fork froze in midair. I'm short, I admitted, hating the way my voice cracked. Ryan leaned back, lips curling. Classic Grace, always behind. Emily burst into laughter, whipping out her phone. Oh my God, this is gold. The poor little tenant can't pay her landlord. She angled the camera at me, eyes gleaming. I wanted to vanish into the floor. My mother shook her head. Grace, maybe this is what you need to finally learn. Laughter spilled through the room, bouncing off walls that once held childhood drawings and family photos, now echoing like a prison chamber. My nails dug deeper into my palms, little half-moons of pain I clung to so I wouldn't scream. That night alone in my room, I checked my bank account. Less than $200 stared back at me. My chest tightened, breath shallow. For a moment, I wondered if they were right, if I really was the failure they claimed, the extra weight dragging the family down. But then, beneath the despair, something else flickered, a flame. Small, stubborn, impossible to snuff out. They thought humiliation would crush me. They didn't know humiliation can also harden, can carve edges sharper than pride. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd stared at as a child. The plaster cracks looked like veins branching across a body. I followed them with my eyes, whispering silently enough. The word filled me, a seed planted deep. They laughed that night, but the sound no longer echoed the same way. For years, I'd believed their voices defined me. Now, I felt the first tremor of rebellion, like the earth shifting under a house that thought it was built on bedrock. I promised myself one thing: their cruelty would not go unanswered. What I didn't know then was that the rent they demanded would become the spark not just for survival, but for reinvention. Because in the quiet hours while they slept, while Dad dreamed of control and Emily polished her online sparkle while Ryan rehearsed his smug monologues, I would be at my desk with the glow of a battered old laptop, and there, in silence, I would begin turning my humiliation into power. And when the time came, the leash they thought they fastened around my neck would tighten around theirs instead. Nights became my sanctuary. When the house finally stopped buzzing, when Dad's footsteps faded into his bedroom, when Emily's laughter retreated behind her door, when Ryan's car rumbled off into the night, I would sit at my desk with my old laptop humming like a secret. Its glow was the only light I trusted, the only fire that belonged to me. At first, I told myself I was just passing time, browsing job boards, tinkering with design software, reading articles about branding and copywriting. But soon those late hours began to take shape. I stumbled across small freelance gigs, a bakery that needed a flyer, a local church that wanted help with social media posts, a boutique looking for Instagram captions. The pay was laughable, $20 here, $30 there, but it was mine. Earned without anyone's approval, untouched by Dad's conditions. Every project felt like laying a brick. A logo revision, an ad campaign draft, a blog post. Slowly, a foundation grew beneath me, hidden from view. I taught myself skills they couldn't even pronounce: SEO analytics, digital marketing strategies. While Emily posted selfies begging for likes, I was learning how to make a brand go viral. While Ryan boasted about office politics, I was building a portfolio line by line, a digital world that carried my name, but none of their fingerprints. The exhaustion was brutal. I'd drag myself home after a cafe shift, choke down instant noodles, then stay up past midnight polishing client edits. Some nights I fell asleep with the keyboard imprinting letters into my skin. But unlike Dad's rent demands, this exhaustion didn't humiliate me, it gave me hope. It whispered that the cage had cracks, that maybe I was chiseling a way out. The first time a client recommended me to someone else, I felt the shift. A boutique owner emailed saying, "I heard you're reliable. Can you take on a 2-week campaign?" Reliable? The word struck me like a spark. Reliable wasn't a burden, wasn't a joke. Reliable meant I mattered. When the payment came through, triple what I made in a week at the cafe, I sat staring at the notification hands, trembling. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof. Proof that I didn't need them. I opened a secret savings account. Each deposit felt like slipping a stone into my pocket, weighing me down in the best way. The numbers grew slowly, digits stacking like fragile steps, but each one meant independence. I checked the balance late at night, grinning in the dark, while Emily's laughter drifted through the walls. Let them believe I was wasting time. Their ignorance was my camouflage. Of course they noticed the hours I spent behind my door. Emily leaned against the frame one night, smirking. "What are you even doing in there?" "Grace playing video games, binge-watching shows." Ryan chuckled from down the hall. "You'll never get anywhere clicking away like that." Even Dad shook his head once, muttering, "Wasted potential." I bit back a smile. If only they knew. If only they saw the emails, the invoices, the designs with my name signed in neat font at the bottom. But ignorance made me invisible, and invisibility was power. While they mocked, I built. The irony struck me one evening when Emily barged into my room without knocking, shoving her phone into my hands. "Fix this." My flight booking glitched. You know tech. She didn't even say please. I stared at her, tempted to laugh. The very trip she was booking, funded by the rent Dad squeezed from me, was supposed to be my punishment, yet here she was, powerless without me. I fixed it quickly, silently, but I tucked the moment away. A week later, Ryan cornered me in the kitchen. "Hey, you're good with words, right? Polish my resume. Make it look sharp." His tone wasn't a request. It was entitlement casual as dropping dirty socks in the hall. I nodded, said nothing, and filed the memory beside Emily's. Then Dad handed me a stack of tax documents. "You're better with computers. File these online." "I don't have the patience." His voice was gruff, but his eyes betrayed something else: dependence. The man who had humiliated me with an empty envelope now relied on me to keep his finances from unraveling. That's when it hit me. They needed me. All of them. Emily couldn't book a flight without me. Ryan couldn't sell himself without me. Dad couldn't navigate his taxes without me. They had painted me as the weak link, but I was the one holding invisible threads that kept their lives from fraying. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't even let myself smirk where they could see. I just nodded, fixed their problems, and stacked every favor in a mental ledger. Each task was proof. Proof that their control over me was an illusion. Proof that the leash they believed they held was already slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, my freelance work bloomed. The boutique referred me to a startup. Soon, I was on video calls suggesting strategies, designing campaigns. They listened. They valued me. For the first time, I wasn't a punchline. I was a voice in the room, and people wanted to hear it. At night, I sat at my desk after finishing projects, staring at the glow of the screen, and thought about the contrast. In one world, I was mocked and belittled. In the other, I was building a reputation, a future. The gap between the two felt almost funny, like I was living a double life. By day, the family scapegoat. By night, a strategist. And then came the discovery that changed everything. One late night, while finishing a client project, I logged into the family computer. A folder had been left open carelessly. Spreadsheets, bank statements, credit card balances. I scrolled, my stomach tightening. Red numbers everywhere. Overdraft fees, late notices, maxed out cards. Ryan's tires, Emily's trips, even Dad's generous dinners, they weren't paid with success. They were financed with debt. I sat back, stunned. The man who sneered that I couldn't pay my bills was drowning in his own. The siblings who mocked my struggles were floating on borrowed time. Every gift, every luxury they flaunted was built on sand. That night, I copied everything, organized it into folders labeled Simply Proof. Each file was a weapon, each spreadsheet a shield. For years, I thought silence meant weakness. Now, I saw it differently. Silence could also mean calculation. When Emily burst into my room days later, panicking about another failed payment, I almost laughed. The family card was maxed out and she didn't know. "Sorry, nothing I can do if the money's not there," I said calmly, handing back her phone. Her face paled. I watched the first crack spread across her perfect confidence. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling I once hated, I realized something: this house wasn't my cage anymore. It was my chessboard, and every piece was sliding into position. I didn't rush. That was the difference between anger and strategy. Anger lashes out. Strategy waits. Patience, I realized, wasn't weakness. It was a blade sharpening in the dark. Emily was the first to stumble. A week before her big destination trip, she stormed into my room, eyes wide, hair wild from pacing. "Grace, fix this. The airline won't process my payment." She shoved her phone at me as if I were her personal assistant. The error message blinked back, card declined. I already knew why I'd seen the red columns in Dad's statements. The family account had collapsed under the weight of their spending. I handed the phone back, voice steady. "If the money isn't there, I can't make it appear. Maybe check with Dad." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Color drained from her face. For the first time, Emily, the girl who could turn every moment into a spotlight, looked small. I savored it quietly. The shouting started minutes later. Emily accusing Dad of promising funds that weren't there. Dad roaring back about ungrateful children. Ryan chiming in to mock her. I sat at my desk sipping lukewarm tea, letting the walls carry their chaos to me like music. One down. Ryan was next. He'd emailed me his resume, an incoherent mess of bullet points and typos. Make it professional. Upload it by tomorrow. His message read more command than request. I stared at the file, tempted to fix it. Old habits die hard. But then I remembered the ledger in my head, all the times he laughed when Dad humiliated me, all the smug grins. Instead of fixing a single word, I uploaded it as it was. Days later, he stomped into the kitchen laptop under his arm, rage barely contained. Can you believe it? Not even a callback. That company's a joke, they wouldn't know talent if it smacked them. Emily laughed behind her phone. Dad muttered something about resilience. I hid my smirk behind a sip of coffee. 2 down. But Dad was harder. He clung to his role as ruler even as the throne beneath him rotted. He still made speeches at dinner about responsibility, still slid notes under my door with $900 circled in red. But I had his secrets now. The late notices, the overdraft fees, the delinquent letters stuffed at the back of folders. Every time he shoved an envelope of tax documents at me, "File these, you're better with computers," I combed through, finding more proof of his downfall. His empire of control was nothing but smoke. I filed everything neatly saved digital copies into my hidden folder labeled Proof. I didn't use it yet. I didn't need to. Knowing I had it was enough to shift the balance. For the first time, I could look him in the eye across the table and not flinch. He didn't know why, but something unsettled him. He barked louder, demanded harsher, as if volume could fill the cracks. Meanwhile, my freelance world expanded. A boutique led to a startup, the startup to another referral. Soon, I had retainers' contracts, real money landing in my account. I watched my savings tick upward like a clock counting down to freedom. Every dollar was a brick in the exit I was building. At night, I'd look at the numbers glowing on my screen, and it felt like oxygen rushing into lungs that had been starved for years. The power shift was subtle at first. A silence here, a delayed favor there. Emily pouted when I didn't drop everything to fix her latest app glitch. Ryan grew restless when I brushed off his quick edits. Dad scowled when I took longer with his paperwork. Their dependence, once invisible, began to show. And with every demand they made, I measured out just enough help to remind them they needed me nevermore. The irony was delicious. For years, I had been the one desperate for scraps of validation. Now they circled me without realizing it, orbiting a sun they had mocked as a flickering candle. I gave them light when I felt like it, and let them stumble in the dark when I didn't. The household grew tense. Emily snapped more often, her selfies thinner, her captions edged with frustration. Ryan bragged louder, but his eyes darted nervously when anyone asked about work. Dad grew restless, prowling the halls at night, muttering about standards slipping. Mom moved quieter, as though afraid the walls themselves might crack under the strain. One evening, as I sat eating quietly at the dinner table, Emily complained about her trip being ruined. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to tell my friends I can't go?" she snapped. Ryan laughed. "Maybe they'll finally stop thinking you're rich." "Shut up," she hissed. "At least I don't beg Grace to fix my screw-ups." The table froze. For a split second, silence roared louder than any laughter I'd ever heard. Their eyes flicked to me. I chewed my bite of pasta, calmly met Emily's glare, then Ryan's. Finally, I looked at Dad. His jaw tightened. He didn't know what I knew, but he sensed something. The power he'd always hoarded was slipping. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how far I'd come from that birthday humiliation. They still thought of me as weak, but weakness had become my shield, my disguise. I remembered my grandmother's words. "What they withhold is a mirror of them, not a measure of you." I repeated it in my head like a mantra. This was no longer about survival. It was about reclamation. And as cracks widened in their kingdom, I realized something chilling and liberating at once. I didn't have to destroy them. All I had to do was stop holding them up. It happened on a Sunday evening, the kind of night when the house always felt heavy with expectation. The smell of overcooked pot roast clung to the air, and the clatter of dishes echoed faintly from the kitchen. Dad called us into the living room with that familiar clap of his hands, the one that had always meant lecture incoming. I carried my coffee with me steady and warm, the cup like a shield in my palms. Family meeting, he announced, settling into his chair like a king about to pronounce judgment. Emily sighed dramatically, tossing her phone onto the armrest. Ryan folded his arms, already smirking as if he'd been let in on the script before anyone else. Mom hovered on the edge of her seat, eyes darting like a bird waiting for a storm to break. Dad leaned forward. From now on, Grace's rent will go directly into the family account. No more excuses, no more delays. This is about accountability. Emily clapped her hands together like a child unwrapping gifts. Ryan nodded, smug approval painted across his face. Even Mom offered her practiced, pitying look, the one that tried to say, "This hurts me more than it hurts you." For a moment, I let the silence hang. I stared into my coffee, inhaling its bitter steam, and felt my pulse steady. Then I looked up. "Actually," I said, voice calm, almost conversational. "About that." All heads turned. Dad's smugness faltered, curiosity flickering. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Emily tilted her head, smirk ready to fire. My heart thundered, but my voice didn't waver. "I've been making changes," I continued. "I opened my own business, built savings. I don't need to hand over anything to a family account that's already maxed out and drowning in debt." The words fell into the room like stones into water. Ripples spread instantly. What Dad barked, face reddening. "What are you talking about?" I set my cup down and reached into my bag. My laptop clicked open, the screen casting a glow across my face. One by one, I pulled up the files I had been saving. Credit card balances in glaring red. Overdraft fees. Late notices from the bank. Copies of tax discrepancies. Spreadsheets that painted the truth in numbers no speech could cover. "You've been living off credit for years," I said evenly. "Ryan's car, Emily's trips, even groceries. Half of it borrowed money. And you thought bleeding me dry would fix it?" I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dad, what you said?" Ryan sputtered, his face draining of color. "That's not those numbers." Mom sat frozen, wide-eyed, her silence finally cracking into something like shame. But it was Dad's face that transfixed me. The man who had ruled our house with lectures and punishments, the man who sneered at my so-called irresponsibility, his mask crumbled. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Where did you get those numbers?" he demanded, but his voice shook. I met his gaze, steady. "From you. You left the files wide open. I've cleaned up enough of your messes to know exactly how deep it runs." Emily's voice cracked. "Wait, you're saying Dad's broke, but what about my trip? You promised stop." My voice cut sharper than I'd ever heard it. The sound startled even me. "Those promises were made on borrowed money. All the likes you brag about online, all the shopping sprees, they're smoke. You laughed at me for being broke, but at least I wasn't financing a fantasy I can't pay back." Her mouth snapped shut. For once, Emily had no comeback. Ryan jumped in louder than necessary. "This doesn't change anything. You're still living here, mooching off everyone else." I turned to him, slowly locking eyes. "No, Ryan. What it changes is that I don't need this house anymore. While you leaned on Dad to fund your lifestyle, I was building something real. I have clients, savings, a business. Without me, you don't get your resumes polished, your glitches fixed, your tax mess sorted. Without me, you fall apart." His face went pale. He muttered something under his breath, but the words had no teeth. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. "Grace, you've been keeping all of this from us." "Yes," I said, tone sharp but steady. "Because every time I tried to share something good, you dismissed it. Every time I asked for support, you mocked me. So I stopped sharing. I started building. And now I don't need your approval. I don't need your help. I don't need anything from this family." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I closed my laptop with a deliberate snap, the sound echoing like a door slamming shut. Then I stood. "I'll be moving out soon. I already have enough saved. Once I'm gone, the rent you demanded disappears. The family account you were so eager to drain, good luck keeping it afloat without me." The shock on their faces was everything I had dreamed of during sleepless nights. Dad's mask of control shattered. Emily looked betrayed, though she had no right to. Ryan sat rigid, his future suddenly brittle. Mom's expression was a mixture of regret and realization, too little too late. I walked to the door, the same door I had passed through countless times, feeling small, diminished, worthless. But this time I paused with my hand on the knob. I turned back, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "You wanted to teach me responsibility?" I said, voice firm, unwavering. "Congratulations. You taught me how to survive without you, and now you'll have to survive without me." Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air was cool against my face. Behind me, silence reigned where laughter used to echo. I closed the door with finality, not as the humiliated daughter they thought I was, but as the woman who had finally taken her life back. The air outside tasted different that night, cooler, sharper, almost electric. I stood on the porch for a long moment listening to the quiet of the neighborhood. A dog barked 2 houses down, leaves whispered in the trees, a car hummed somewhere far off. It struck me then how much smaller the world of my family really was, how their voices had echoed so loud inside those walls that I'd mistaken them for the universe. But out here in the open, their noise was just one house among thousands. I walked down the steps slowly, like I was learning to walk again. The sidewalk stretched in both directions, a road I'd ignored for years, while convincing myself I was trapped. I touched the strap of my bag inside my laptop, rested glowing faintly in my imagination, carrying every project, every proof that I wasn't who they said I was. For the first time in years, my shoulders felt light. In the days that followed, the silence from the house grew loud. Dad didn't storm into my room anymore because it was empty. Emily didn't shove her phone at me because I wasn't there to fix it. Ryan didn't drop his resume in my inbox. The leash had snapped, and with it went their certainty that I'd always be there to carry them. I rented a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It smelled faintly of paint and dust when I moved in, but it was mine. The floorboards creaked when I walked. The water pipes groaned at night, but every sound felt like freedom. I bought a second-hand desk, set up my laptop, and taped a note above it with one word: enough. Work poured in faster than I'd expected. The boutique referred me again. The startup extended their contract, and soon I was juggling more projects than I thought I could handle. Clients called me professional essential, a lifesaver. Words that once felt foreign now stuck to me like a second skin. Sometimes, when exhaustion pressed down, I'd open the shoebox I'd carried with me. Inside were the scraps of my quiet victories, the lace from the prom dress, the movie ticket stub, the old compliment note. But I added something new, a copy of the empty envelope from my birthday. It sat there as a reminder: humiliation can be fuel. I heard from them eventually. Emily called once, her voice brittle, circling around what she really wanted. Her trip had been canceled, her friends whispering behind her back. "You could at least help your sister out," she said. But there was no bite in it. I told her gently that I was busy, and when she hung up, I didn't feel guilt. Ryan sent a curt email attaching his new resume, asking if I could make it competitive this time. I let the message sit unread. For years, my worth had been measured by how quickly I bent to their needs. Now, silence was my answer. Dad was the last. A letter arrived one morning, scrawled in his handwriting. Inside, no lecture, no gavel. Just a single line: "If you think you're better off without us, then I hope you're right." The words were meant to wound, but I read them twice and felt nothing but clarity. Better off without them wasn't a hope, it was a fact. And Mom, she never wrote. But sometimes late at night, I imagined her walking past my empty room, her eyes catching on the blank walls, her silence finally loud enough to hear. Freedom didn't come as fireworks. It came in small, steady ways. Cooking my own meals, no one mocking me for eating leftovers. Working late on campaigns, no one calling it wasted time. Sitting by the window on Sunday mornings, sipping coffee, no one comparing me to Ryan or Emily. Every quiet moment was proof that my life was mine. Yet sometimes I'd catch myself wondering, did they ever think of me? Did Dad still give his speeches only now, with a hollow space in the audience? Did Emily scroll through her photos and feel the absence of the sister she used to mock? Did Ryan glance at his stalled career and realize he no longer had me to polish the edges? I didn't need the answers. The truth lived in my own reflection now. One evening, as I closed my laptop after finishing a campaign that paid more than 2 months of Dad's rent demands, I stepped onto my balcony. The wind carried the faint sound of a chime from a neighbor's porch, and I thought of my grandmother. Don't let people price you by what they refuse to give. She was right. They withheld love, respect, and support not because I lacked worth, but because they lacked the ability to see it, and in their blindness, they taught me the most important lesson to see it in myself. The skyline in the distance glowed city lights, flickering like 1,000 open doors. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the night, and let the memory of that birthday fade into something else, not a scar, but a spark. Because I wasn't the fool with the empty envelope anymore. I wasn't the punchline. I wasn't the daughter left behind. I was Grace, and I had survived. No more than that. I had begun. Have you ever been treated like the unwanted one in your own family, like nothing you did was ever enough? What would you have done if you were in my place, standing there with that empty envelope in your hand? Share your story in the comments below because your voice deserves to be heard. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell because sometimes the strongest stories are the ones families never expected us to tell.